Welcome back to the Fierce Freedom Podcast. I'm Kat Morgan.
And I'm Jenny Almquist.
Ooh, I'm excited that Jenny's going to be joining us because we have a very special guest today. So we have Rebecca Bender. And I don't know if there's anyone in the movement who doesn't really know who Rebecca Bender is, but I'll just share a little bit more about our guest. So she's the CEO and founder of Rebecca Bender Initiative and Elevate Academy. Rebecca is a CEO and published author who has earned a distinct reputation as a trailblazer and thought leader in the field. Her specialized training has equipped well over 100,000 professionals, including FBI, Homeland Security, local law enforcement, community leaders, medical professionals, and more. Rebecca was appointed to the United States National Advisory Council and serves as an advisor to AKITAS, A21, and the HSI North Texas Task Force. She also assists as a subject matter expert for investigations and operations across the country and is regularly called upon to testify as an expert witness. Rebecca is a highly sought after speaker, consultant, and nationally recognized authority who is passionate about seeing people transform their lives so they can change the world. So with that, without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Rebecca.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always funny to hear the bio. It's like the one thing that you think your mom probably wrote for you, because the moms are always so proud.
Yes.
I tell people, if you need a bio written, like ask your mom for
Just ask
help.
your
She
mom.
will always be your best hype man. Yes.
Totally. Like a job application. You're like, Mom, when did I do this well? Like they're gonna have something ready for you.
Exactly. Mom, what do I do really well? She'll tell you.
Yes.
She'll probably tell you what you don't do well too.
Guess I was just thinking, maybe that depends on your mom.
Right. Well, there's both, right? Yeah, we're just really excited. We were sharing before we started recording how, we've been familiar with your work. We've heard you speak, Jenny and I have both heard you speak for years, and you've just been this voice, this champion of really what trafficking actually looks like kind of helping dispel those myths. And so that's something we'll kind of get into a little bit more. But yeah, how long have you been doing this work for, basically?
Wow, I got involved in the anti-trafficking field in 2008. So I think it's got to be 14 years now. I think I'm not the best at math. And actually my very first speaking engagement, I got involved, I was living in London and I had ran from my trafficker. I was living in the UK with a buyer. I call it my Richard Gere year, thinking maybe Pretty Woman was real. And I can remember getting a little postcard in. Yeah, exactly. Didn't work out that way. But I can remember getting a postcard through the slot in your front door, like they still do mail like that over there.
Mm-hmm.
And it said how many brothels are in your borough. And for those of you who don't know, borough means kind of neighborhood in UK and I think in the East Coast too. But anyway, I can remember thinking, what is this about? And so I called and emailed, I think I emailed first that anti-trafficking organization that had put together that flyer and met with the executive director and started volunteering and they asked me to speak. And so I showed up to my very first speaking engagement at Oxford University and it was a public debate against a dominatrix.
What?
Oh.
And I thought, well, that's just throwing someone in, isn't it?
Wow.
My goodness.
I thought, thank God I took debate in the 8th grade. Otherwise, I would have no clue what a rebuttal is. I just pulled out a blank piece of paper and started writing a response to things that she said that I just wanted a different perspective on for viewers. But it was awful. I did not do a good job. I
was wondering how it went. Yeah.
Well, I could see people in the crowd like shaking their head in disbelief or rolling their eyes. And even I think I was quoted in a book that day. There was an author there, Kat Banyard. She wrote a book called The Equality Illusion. You go to amazon.co.uk. She did not pay me for this plug, but you can see the quote from me. And it says something like, human trafficking is reserved for kidnapped kids. I was forced into prostitution by a boyfriend. Like I literally say that. Like it's so
wow.
crazy.
I think that's kind of a good quote though, honestly. Right?
Well, the reality though is like, I didn't realize that forced into prostitution because of what you're considering domestic violence is the legal definition of trafficking, and so I just didn't know anything about this
you
movement.
said yes. Right.
Yeah, I didn't know what the legal definition was. I didn't know that the use of force, fraud, or coercion is
Mm-hmm.
what is defined as trafficking in the US statute. And so I just didn't know anything about this issue, about the laws. I couldn't articulate coercion played out in everyday life. Like if you ask any layperson, what's coercion in a relationship? Like no one can usually give you an example. It's kind of it's hard to identify. And so that was, long story short, that was my first time in the movement, getting thrown in. And it's been a really great journey to learn more. And I would say the only thing that's been hard is just publicly learning, right? There's things that I've said on interviews that don't make sense, that I don't agree with today, that are different perspective. I mean, 14 years is a long time, especially when you're having to learn publicly. And so,
Right.
it is what it is. All I can do is admit my mistakes publicly now and hope that, believe me, I do think that women forced into prostitution are still trafficked victims.
Right. Absolutely.
Rebecca, I just think that it's so great though that you just kept showing up. You know what I mean? I mean, every day people ask us all the time, how is it? Because I was, I'm not a survivor, but my first introduction to human trafficking and the issue was through Chris Kane and the A21 campaign. And I'm not a survivor leader, but I was just so impassioned. And um, I just have learned along the way as well. And especially 2007, 2008, people weren't talking about it like they are today. But how do we keep doing it is just show up every day and do your best and one foot in front of the other. And you've done that. And you're an example for all of us. And it's just great to have watched you and watch the platform that you have and the work that you're doing and the good that's coming out of all of that.
Thank you. That means a lot. It is. You're right. Just every day, keep showing up, one foot in front of the other. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to unintentionally. But, I think that we just keep showing up and we learning and we learn. It doesn't mean you stay in that,
Right.
place of not learning about how to do trauma informed care and how to interact and engage in a really meaningful, impactful way. Nikki Bell has this great quote. She says, impact over intent. And so sometimes we don't want to minimize like, well, just keep showing up. You had good intentions. It's like, yes, and though we grow
Yes.
and we learn and we take
Yes.
feedback and we pivot and we course correct and we get better. And so that's all I can hope that I can model. I'm definitely still fall short all the time, but at least, yeah, we just keep showing up and we keep learning.
Yeah, that's just so encouraging, I think, for those of us who feel like, oh, am I going to do this wrong? Like to hear from a survivor leader such as yourself and to hear that, like, just keep showing up and the fact that you've evolved and that you've changed and you've been open to other people's, like those conversations and having those conversations. Because I know that in my time doing this, and I've been doing this like less than you, but I've completely changed in so many things. And so it's just good to be aware that as people are thinking, okay, how can I really best be doing this kind of work? Just really be open to those voices that are different than yours and those opinions that are different than yours. I think it's
Yeah.
really important. So yeah, Rebecca, just for a little bit of context for listeners, like you mentioned, you had left life of trafficking 14 years ago. And or sorry, you've been doing this work for 14 years, but you had left it before that. So I'm just wondering, as you were realizing that, like learning about your own experience, when did kind of that penny drop for you, where you were realizing like this is trafficking, like what's going on?
It was that's a great question. I think it was probably 2 years into back home in the US, two years in, that I started really better understanding. And it was actually I went to an event where there was a screening of a documentary called Nefarious. Um, and as I watched it, I saw these three other countries, human trafficking depicted in three countries, and then the fourth country was in Las Vegas. Well, country, but fourth country was US in the city specifically of Las Vegas. And as I watched it, I realized that trafficking looked really different based on the culture and community in which you live. And it kind of hit me that I had been referring to forced prostitution quite possibly just in the wrong way. And it caused me to start really digging into what is the legal definition, and which is, according to the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, the use of force, fraud, or coercion in order to engage somebody in commercial sex, and so, or labor or organ as well. Like, but
Right.
the part for me that was relevant was the commercial sex component. And so I started kind of looking at my own timeline and my own story and thinking, where was force, fraud, or coercion used in the quote unquote relationship that I thought I had with my first trafficker? And I started also gathering information. I started working a little bit with law enforcement. And so I would ask, like, can we run a LexisNexis on my first trafficker? And come to find out, he was not the same age that he said he was. He already had a criminal record for stalking and providing minors with alcohol. He'd already had a criminal record for selling drugs. He had already had all these things that fraudulently that he covered, and fraudulently showed a whole different facade to who he was. And I thought, that's the epitome of fraud. When someone says they're a different age than they are, says they have a different profession than they have, say they live in a different city than they live in, are covering up criminal records, saying they have a job that they actually don't have. Like, that's actually the epitome of fraud. And so to look at, the cycle of trafficking, when you're looking at grooming, dating, breaking, and turning out, which is the 4 categories that I slowly identified in my own life, the cycle, I could see how in the dating phase, fraud was used at point of recruitment. And so I just started kind of putting 2 and 2 together as I learned about the issue, the law, the cycle, and points of recruitment, points of destination. Then I laid it over contextually my story, and you start connecting the dots of, like, wait a minute, just because it happened in a first world country, just because it happened in Las Vegas, doesn't make the abuse less. It doesn't make the fraud less. It doesn't make how I felt being tricked and conned and hurt and abused less, just because it wasn't in Eastern Europe or in somewhere in, the karaoke bar in Cambodia. Like, it doesn't make it less. It makes it just really different based on culture and community. And so that for me was kind of the clicker that flipped the switch. And I started just kind of going all in to help try to show that to everybody, right? Trying to show it to anyone, to just sound the alarm, because I wanted people to know. If I know this is kind of a really long answer, so I'm so sorry to your listeners, but also the thought of just like, if I'm thinking this about trafficking, I grew up in the same community as everyone else, as any listener. So like, every one of us is probably thinking of trafficking this way. And then we're not noticing when we're in a really dangerous situation, when we're at a party and we feel uncomfortable, or our boundaries are being pushed, or that older boy says something that's actually fraudulent. Like, I feel like we're not sharing the right warning signs. And so that was, for me, the reason I decided to kind of quit my job, sell my company. I was working at running an ultrasound center at the time, and go full into nonprofit work.
I love that.
Wow.
I love that just really your own unmasking of your experience has really helped other people to see that, like, that's had that effect. And I absolutely agree. I think if we always say that, it's like, if we think we know what it looks like over here, we're gonna totally miss it when it's right in front of us. So that's why we think that's really so important as we continue to educate as well. And so I really appreciate that that's been your life's work, to really unmask that and to really show what it does look like, rather than kind of perpetuating the falsity, and to be vulnerable and open up of, like, hey, this is what it looked like for me. Like, that isn't always easy, because, as you said, people have this idea of, like, well, clearly this was the fault of the prostitute. Like, this is kind of getting, like, just a, kind of, we have to restructure the social norm so that we're not using that kind of language as well. That's
Agreed.
really harmful.
Yeah, it's so true. And I mean, we do this as a society in general. We put stigmas on people engaged in prostitution, but I think even more so, traffickers exploit that. And when we look at Jeffrey Epstein, for example, I mean, purposefully giving teenagers money, the cognitive reasoning of a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 15-year-old kid is that I have now done something I'm not supposed to do, and I've taken money for it. And so you immediately blame yourself, hide it, not want to tell anyone, because now you've owned or bought into some amount of ownership. And the reality is that grown man knew that and purposefully gave you something that would make you feel compliant and at fault. And so we have to start putting the blame where it really should land, which is on the shoulders of perpetrators and abusers, you know?
Yeah, that shame does not belong on victims, and so often that's where it falls, but that's so wrong. So then, Rebecca, just kind of something that I've heard a lot, and I think that is talked about a lot, is sort of this victim, survivor, thriver model. So basically, I think it's this idea of you're a victim of trafficking, and then you move to becoming a survivor, and then ultimately you're a thriver. So do you feel like this is accurate to the experience of most victims? And then, is it kind of this progression, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, the victim survivor thriver model, which I think was actually coined by Rachel Lloyd out of GEMS. I think she has a VST like curriculum, VSL, VST, victim survivor leader thriver. That kind of a concept was a curriculum, I think, created by GEMS and Rachel Lloyd. So I want to give them credit. But that's always the goal for all of us, to lead and thrive in the capacity in which we feel the most beneficial for us in our lives and the settings are in. I feel like it's not quite as easy and as linear as sometimes that trajectory can sound. There's a lot of victim, survivor, I'm barely surviving, I'm barely getting by, I have no clue what I'm doing with my life, I'm working minimum wage still, is this really freedom? And you kind of circle around that, I think, for a while, until you start to really find some footing. And then right, like things like the pandemic hit and people lost their jobs, and it was really hard, and we saw a lot of people that had engaged in exploitation go back and join OnlyFans instead, or become a cam girl, and all the things that became really easy to make quick money because you're in desperation. And then where does that fall in regards to like choice, force, or circumstance, and what was the caveat that kind of pushed you into objectification and exploitation? And it's hard. And so I just don't feel like it's sometimes that simple. It's VST. Like it's like, totally. When are we thriving? When are we leading? Who really am I leading right now? Is it just is it my family? Is it my kids? Is it my circle of influence? Am I leading in my community? Do I really feel like I'm thriving? And I don't know that you ask any woman with any amount of his past, do you feel like you're thriving today? And we could tell you 10 things that we're still working on, right? And so it just feels like reminding each other that you're doing great, you're right where you're supposed to be. Keep leading in the ways you can, keep thriving, keep shooting for the next goals and dreams that you have for your life, whatever that looks like. And I think just trying to be each other's cheerleader is the best we can do. But yeah, VST, that's the goal. we ever make it. I think we just keep camping out on each dot, and back and forth and up and down.
Yeah.
I think about the stages of change model as well, which is kind of that idea that somebody may be in that pre-contemplation, they may then contemplate, and then there may be action, but they may go back to that. And just that's encouraging, because I think as well for like service providers, like don't be judging so harshly this person who is really trying, like maybe that isn't going to look linear for them. It likely won't. And just again, using your own life as something to think about, like, okay, am I really moving from like this progression all the time? Is that how my life looks? And it's likely that that's not going to happen, especially for someone that's been working through layers of trauma. That's not what that's going to look like. So that's, I think, encouraging to hear.
I think it's really great, because we get so many people ask us, well, we're not doing direct services right now, but we have in the past. And people will say, well, how many people that you've worked with are truly out of the life, who are truly, and people really want a black and white answer. And I really love that, Rebecca, because how many of us are walking in our ideal, like every single day? It's a goal and it's a journey. Yeah, that's good. I love that for our listeners right now, to hear you say that, and for how you see it in the world that we work in. It's just complicated. It's not black and white. Sometimes it's gray. And that's really good.
It kind of gives that permission to just like have grace and give slack.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Like, if you ask anyone, are you thriving right now? I mean, if we ask you that, are you thriving in your life? There are seasons that I feel like I'm thriving. And then there are seasons when life happens, illness happens, there's loss, relationships end in a way you didn't expect. There's job loss. There's so many things that happen that you're like, man, last year I really felt thriving. And then this year been a really hard season. And I took a hit in some things that I was not expecting. And I don't feel like I'm thriving, but I'm definitely developing character, getting stronger, living through hard seasons. I think we've all been in that kind of, we've all had life. That's life. That's just life, right? And so, yeah, the goal is to get survivors. For me, my goal is to assist women and men, whoever goes through our program, to become economically empowered so that when life does happen, you don't feel forced to choose between having to sell yourself and eating, right? Like my goal is to really get people to a place when those seasons happen, you take a hit, car breaks down, job loss, that it's like you still feel confident that you can get through the season without having to resort back to old behaviors and patterns. That's the goal. And to be able to identify, you know what, I'm having my neuroplasty, my neurological way of doing something. I habitually went back to an old thought pattern, and I've caught it this time, and I've course corrected, and I'm choosing something. Like those two things will be life changing for anyone who's lived through trauma.
And I love how you've really walked through that journey with Elevate Academy and with the resources that you've created. And again, like, I feel like one of the first survivor voices that has really talked about economic independence and sort of relearning that. So yeah, that was, so what else is something that you've been wanting to do as you've kind of created these resources, since you've done so many? I mean, you have a Bible study book out. You have several things out that have really walked through, I think, this with survivors, kind of holding their hand, because it's like, this is such a up and down thing. Like we said, it's nonlinear. So yeah, what are some of those other kind of motivations that you have?
Yeah, two things. One, I would say when we first started Elevate Academy, I didn't even have the phrase economic empowerment at the time. I called it my now what. That's all I could come up with.
Right.
But I remember escaping from trafficking and living in my government subsidized townhouse and on Wharton Street in Grants Pass, Oregon, this crappy little townhouse. And I had like a 50-cent pot and pan from Goodwill and a mattress from Craigslist. Literally, that's what I had. And thankful to my family who took me to yard sales and drove me around town and picked up stuff with me and helped support me through that time. And it sucked, right? Like I was grateful, but it was still really, really crappy. And I can remember just sitting in my kitchen, getting really upset and angry and just thinking, now what? Like, this is freedom. This is what all these activists, all these churches, all these people talk about, this freedom. Like, this is freedom where I can barely afford to eat. I'm counting pension pennies, counting food stamps, can't do birthday present or Easter baskets, or like little things that make you feel normal when you have a child, especially. And I just was like, this can't possibly be it. And I remember feeling very clearly this epiphany of like, if I can give this new life the same amount of time as I gave the old life, that it won't be outdone. And so I just determined that I would try for 6 years, this new way of living. And I just dug my heels in. And I think in that moment, I determined in my heart, like, all right, I'm giving this crap 6 years. If it's not better, I'm out, right? And so
I don't know what I'm gonna do. Yeah, right.
and so that was kind of my journey of now what. That's, I call it my season of now what. Now what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Work a minimum wage job? Like what? Go back to school? I had no clue. And so Elevate was really birthed out of that concept to help survivors explore their now what. And so we do career exploration, we do personality profiling, we do life planning, we do all sorts of stuff that help women really start to figure out who they are and what gifts and talents have been left dormant, and what path they can take, and really creating a roadmap on how to achieve some of the goals that maybe they're barely starting to dream about. One example is I had a 16-year-old trafficked girl that said to me, I'm asking her what her dreams and goals are, and I think to be a smart Alec, she was like, well, I want to go to Paris. And so that week I ordered foreign exchange student programs to Paris. I ordered missionary excursions to Paris. I put these 2 packets on, brought them to her about a week later. And I said, you have 2 ways that you could go to Paris in the next 90 days. You get through school and you sign up and you start attending this one youth group. Like, those are 2 options that actually would allow you to be in Paris by June. And she was like, what? And I'm like, these dreams that we have can actually be reality. They might not look like you're driving on a private jet with Kim Kardashian, but like, the reality is, if you do have an idea, like, let's think outside the box. Let's figure out how to actually accomplish it. And obviously she didn't really want to go to Paris. She was just throwing something at us. But it was a reminder to me that as we start thinking of what are the dreams that survivors carry, right? We all were sold a dream by our trafficker. And I love what Patty Bennett, one of the Elevate mentors that we have at our school, she says, my dream was to come to America to get an education. And that dream was exploited by my trafficker, but it was always a good dream. And I just
Yeah.
love that, because
I love that. Yeah.
yeah. So asking people, like, what is it that he promised you? And then let's help you get there without him. Like, let's help you get there without being exploited, without risking your life, without having long-term, the effects of long-term trauma, the effects of living in long-term fear that increases anxiety and depression and mental health. And like, let's figure out how to get it without all of these really negative add-ons that happen when you live in a life that's full of fear and abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because as you're talking, I'm even thinking about how you're right. Like, some of the means that traffickers will use in a way are the solution, like how the love bombing. It's like, if we, and I'm sure you could really speak to this, Rebecca, but it's like walking alongside a survivor. You want to restore that dignity and that worth to them in a way that is genuine, but by speaking words of love and of kindness. And I'm sure that for them, that's complicated because that has been used against them. So be patient that, they're used to that being a manipulation, right? But again, that's kind of with our program, we want to infuse that, like, worth, dignity, and value whenever we're speaking to a group of kids or, any survivor. That's always our goal too.
Yeah. Yeah. So Rebecca, it's so great to hear like what you have done with Elevate Academy and the other resources that you have. And you may have something out here for this, but as you're talking, I'm just thinking, okay, so we know that we can, help with some creative ways to really bring those dreams, and bring those in front of people. I love that. I would have never thought of those things. But we have up here in Western Wisconsin, there's a lot of familial trafficking. And then there's a lot of, it's just really, and it's probably the same way, throughout the United States. But that's the case up here. And there's a lot of people who do have some, like some healthy and some unhealthy people, people who are surrounding them. If they have friends or family or, I'm just thinking, what are some really good things that safety net people can really do to help?
Yes.
I can see professionally as we're talking, but what are some really, because I think that people who are trying to be a safety net for people who have been exploited or trafficked really try to help, but sometimes it's not always helpful. Like financially, just really, gosh, this is kind of a complicated one, but do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, I
Sense?
think, yeah, for sure. I think, familial trafficking is really, it's everywhere. I see it more. I don't want to say more. I think in more rural areas, you don't have as many of the other typologies of crime, and so familial tends to get highlighted because you might not have a cantina in your neighborhood or an illicit massage parlor out in, right, the rural communities of Oregon, right? Like, that's where I'm from. So I think that familial, which is everywhere, can stand out when we are in communities where some of the other typologies don't necessarily always exist. And that is harder because it's not a dream that a child was sold. It's the trust and the relational element, and the complex compound trauma that comes from multiple perpetrators and multiple experiences, which can be a little bit different than than child abuse, which is one perpetrator and multiple experiences. When you have multiple perpetrators and multiple experiences, it's considered complex compound trauma, also known as polyvictimization, which takes a really specific type of therapeutic therapy. It takes just a different specific type of therapy to help those individuals with complex compound trauma, which is all traffic victims. But I think it's just really important to know it's going to look different, and it's going to take different type of therapy, and proper diagnosis leads to proper treatment. We wouldn't put a broken arm in a sling and send somebody home. You'd put it in a cast, you'd see if it would need pins or screws. And so I think sometimes we're just, marking or labeling things one thing and sending clients out the door instead of really trying to understand what type of therapeutic modality best fits this type of trauma, and finding those therapists that are specializing in the type of crime that took place for each individual. With that being said, I think when you're in a community where survivors are living and you want to be a part, my recommendation would be to learn a lot about trauma, right? Read Body Keeps the Score, read about secondary and vicarious trauma, read about complex compound trauma, polyvictimization, read memoirs written by survivors. We have a list on our website of survivor books you can read. Just try to educate yourself as much as you can, and then do life with people. Just do life with people. Yeah, there are going to be times when they might ask you to pay a bill, and by the third or fourth time, you might want to go, hey, should we take a budgeting class? Because you keep having me pay your utility bill, but I see you with cigarettes and Red Bull. So we got to figure this out. Let's call the local community college. Let's call the small business center. Let's call a library. Let's see if there's a budgeting class you can take online. There's so much online nowadays. You can do budgeting classes anywhere online, right? And so,
so good.
I think just doing life with people, remembering that, what really helped me get on my feet was my family and my community. And if you're familially trafficked, your family is not safe to help you get on your feet. And so who becomes that family for that individual? Who's going to babysit their kid when they want to go take a placement test to get into college and get their prereqs done? Who's going to babysit their kid on that job interview? Who might help? I bring up Easter earlier, but my mom, for the first 5 years of my time out of human trafficking, it was just became this unspoken, I don't want to say, it became an unspoken blessing that my mom covered Easter baskets every year for my kids, because I couldn't afford them. And I wanted to feel normal. I wanted to feel like I was a normal mom on a normal Easter Sunday. And little things like that, we forget, make a real difference in helping people reintegrate and to find their new normal and to find a new way of living that makes them feel happy and empowered and not embarrassed that they can't afford to join you on a Saturday at a picnic because they literally can't bring something. Being thoughtful through that, saying, hey, I would love to, do you want to bring something? Can I grab a bag of chips for you? Or just literally doing life with people and thinking how you can help empower them in a way that makes them feel a part. Yeah. Little things like when I got invited to my very first speaking engagement to go out of town, I was really excited, but the conference planner didn't think about, I couldn't afford airport parking for 3 days. I couldn't. It's $36. That's a lot. And you couldn't afford it. And I got home and I had to put it on a credit card. So I'm going into debt for someone else's speaking engagement. Wow. Little things people don't think about that make a really big difference. And so just empowering them, budgeting classes, and being honest to call them on things when you start seeing or feeling used, to be able to say, hey, you've asked me 3 times now, and this makes me uncomfortable. Let's talk through this. And I love you. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not rejecting you. I'm not abandoning you, but we do need to talk about budgeting. It's no big deal, and so figuring out ways to deliver that message that doesn't trigger them. And it could trigger, but I think the other tip would be, as you read those books and as you educate yourself on trauma, knowing that any heightened emotional response from someone means you've just hit a trigger. And so I can remember when I was writing the Bible study on Exodus, which was fairly recently, I was triggered in a meeting with a pastor's wife, and I flipped out on her. And I share this openly in the book, that I flipped out on this pastor's wife, and it was not good. I'm not saying it's right. And I wish, and it didn't end well, and still is not. Still, we just don't talk, right? But even though I've tried to apologize, but the reality is, I wish in the moment that someone would have said, hey, time out. Rebecca, you're having a really heightened emotional response right now to this conversation. And I'm wondering if something's triggering you. none of this topic is even what is upsetting you, like what's going on. And in that moment I would have said, I'm suddenly feeling manipulated and my fight, flight, or freeze is instantly kicking in, and I'm a fighter, and so we're going to go toe to toe. Like, it's not something I'm proud of, but it's my straight response to feeling like someone's manipulating me. And so it's this instant response that I want to fight you. And that's not healthy, and it's not okay, and it's not okay that I did it. But I just wish someone in the room would have understood trauma in the moment and said, hey, time out. You're having a really heightened emotional response. Let's talk about what's triggering you. But instead it was, oh my gosh, Rebecca Bender's so difficult. And it's hurtful because it's like, I'm actually not difficult, but what was happening was making me feel like you guys were all trying to manipulate me.
Yeah.
And maybe you weren't. And so then let's talk through that. And unfortunately, I didn't have that ability to reflect that way until a few days, because I needed, like, my trigger had to go down. I had to settle down. I had to process, like, why did I respond that way? And what was going on? And I had to do it on my own. I didn't get to do it with the people in the room with me that should have known about trauma and should have been able to say, hey, what's going on? And so I use that one example of, like, if you're doing life with someone and they're having a heightened response, take a minute and give a timeout, and don't take it personal, and don't also put it on them, because it's like, you could be seeing their trauma right now, and it's not who they are, and it's not the character that they're developing, and it's a moment for you to help bring some healing and some calmness and some peace to the situation. But those are really, like, those messy moments just come up when you're doing life.
Yeah.
That is a good word right there. Yeah.
That's really good. And I think,
Thank
like,
you.
like you said, just having that equity in place, like continuing to walk alongside them, like that word that may have to come when you are holding them accountable is going to, again, like you said, there may be some triggering going on, but if you're able to educate yourself about why they're being triggered, and that, what those signs look like, and not taking it so personally, because this is not about you, this is just their experience. But again, like, having that equity with them, I feel like it's going to be a softer place for that to land, if you've already kind of been building into them.
Absolutely.
So Rebecca, what is something you wish people would get about sex trafficking, and what is something that brings you hope in the movement? It's the two-pronged.
Oh, okay. Those are good. What is someone that I wish people get, and what's something that brings me hope? I think it's such a great question. Okay. Something that I wish people got, that trafficking is, I think I'm going to maybe flip it for a second. Okay. What brings me hope is that we have come a really long way in the last 14 years that I've been in this field. I have seen a lot more awareness, a lot more people better understand what trafficking looks like, better understanding that there's all different types of trafficking. It's not just pimp controlled or familial, but there's all sorts of typologies of crime when it comes to trafficking. And I think people are really starting to better understand the issue. What I wish people would know is that we're not all there yet. Like, there's pockets of us that are interested in this topic that exist within communities, but there are broader sweeping nation doesn't really understand the difference between forced choice and circumstance, maybe doesn't fully understand systemic prostitution. If someone doesn't have a third party perpetrator, does that mean they want to be there? Well, I don't know. Do you want to eat, or do you want to, like, there's some things that come with just circumstance that get people into situations that they might not choose if they had privilege and fair living wages and affordable housing, right? And so I think it's this much broader systemic discussion around resources and support and services for marginalized communities. And so I just think when you really dive in, you start to learn some of that. And so I have hope because I've seen so much progress. When I first started in this movement, we were seeing grown men traffic 14-year-old girls and barely get time in jail. And now we're seeing grown-ups traffic adult women that are 22 and getting 36 to life. And so we're seeing huge strides in really juries and judges and prosecutors and law enforcement better understanding trauma-informed interviewing, thinking of innovative ways to prosecute, not putting a full case completely reliant on a victim's testimony. Like I'm proud and I'm so hopeful to see the progress that we've made. But man, we still have so much to do outside the pockets of us that are interested in the topic.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great. I'm so sorry too, because there's a lawnmower going on outside.
Oh, I can't hear it. I can't hear it at all.
Really?
So you're
Oh,
totally
good.
fine.
I was
Yeah,
like,
nope.
oh my gosh. Great timing. No, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Because I think, like you mentioned before, coercion is something that's so difficult to prove. I mean, even in a court, like intent is hard to prove. You know, you really have to have that language and to have a more educated jury. That's why that awareness that we're trying to do and other organizations are trying to do, I think we have to all kind of come together so that people are just more educated about it.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the projects that I've been working on that I'm the most excited about in the next couple of years is a TV series called Coercion.
Yeah.
And I've partnered with Susanna Grant, Gail Lyon, and Rosanna Arquette, three incredible producers and writers. Susanna Grant wrote Erin Brockovich. She did Unbelievable on Netflix. And so to be working with these incredible storytellers and producers to get something out to the world that's different than Taken, but it's called Coercion. And we get to watch relational components of coercive tactics used within characters. And hopefully people will lean in. I think, you know, much like your podcast, entertainment is one of the greatest tools we have to shape culture. And so how can we lean into that? And that's been a goal of mine in this last couple of years, is really focusing, because of cultural change through entertainment, really focusing on the entertainment industry and learning how to write and learning how to produce and learning how to storyboard and just really kind of starting to go all in to equip America in a way that's engaging and entertaining, and yet can give us a different perspective than we've been seeing over the last decade. So that's my goal. That's what I've been working on. We wrapped a pilot in November. I'm really excited to see where it goes. And I have lots of other projects and ideas. I mean, I'd love to help survivor stories get told in a way that's really meaningful for them. And so I've got some other things in the works that we're working on, but you know, you only have so many hours in the day. And so this season of my life, I'm supporting my oldest daughter through the NCAA Nationals and Outdoor Championships. She is the third fastest female in the nation right now.
That's fantastic.
What?
Yes, it is so exciting. I actually fly out today to fly to Eugene, Oregon at the classic Hayward Field to watch her run at Nationals. And so she was the little girl that grew up in a life of trafficking and was 8 when I threw over the fence when the feds were coming, and to just see her thriving today, I'm so grateful. I'm not just a proud mama, which is true, but I'm also like, man, if you knew what this kid lived through, you'd be standing up and cheering with me too. So that's what I'm doing this season. And then I'm excited to get back to equipping through entertainment.
That's so cool.
Gosh.
I feel like I totally agree with like equipping through entertainment. That's so, because think about again how powerful Taken was and how that really imprinted in the minds and imaginations of people. So you're going in that route because you're like, well, that's where people are going, and you want to be heard. You want your message to be heard. So that's the language that you have to speak. But I feel like that's, you know, I'm really pumped about this TV series. Was that something that was like a dream of yours that you always wanted to do?
Yeah, 8 years ago, I maybe even more, I had the thought that entertainment is the greatest tool we have to shape culture. And so I Skyped into a TV writer's class in LA, and I wrote a pilot. And then that year I happened to get a contract to train LA's undercover cops. And so someone had told me a long time ago that people in LA don't ask how you are, they ask what you're working on. And so when I was down training undercover cops, people would say, what are you here for? And I thought, well, I could tell them I'm training undercover cops. It's still pretty cool. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to start putting my dream out there. And I would say, well, even though I'm here for work, I'm actually also working on a TV series. I wrote this pilot, and if you know anybody. And so one meeting would lead to another meeting. And next thing you know, Rosanna Arquette and I were meeting with Gail Lyon, the producer of Erin Brockovich, and a million other things, Pistols, Destination Wedding. She's just phenomenal and has become a really good friend and mentor to me. But that was 8 years ago. And so we all partnered and started pounding the pavement and got where we're at now. And I'm just really hopeful that that the project finds a home and that we get to get it out to the world.
Really
Congratulations, Rebecca. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's been really fun, and really showed me that I love telling story. I just love telling story, whether it's page, stage, or on the screen. I love telling story. I didn't realize, this is again back to elevate. It's like you actually don't know what you're good at when you've been trafficked. You've had sometimes like such formative decade of your life stolen from you.
Yeah.
Times when you should be finishing high school and going off to college and figuring out a career, that's stolen. You don't know, for me, especially just my age specifically, I should say, it's like I'm coming back into the world at 29. I have no clue I don't know if I'm, creative and a photographer, if I like spreadsheets and bookkeeping. Like I genuinely have no idea. And so getting to explore that, being a model, a role model, I hope in some way of saying, I didn't know what I really liked either. And as I've explored a variety of things, I've come to know in this season, I love telling story. I love it. And I want to figure out more ways to do it. And I see other documentary filmmakers or other indie filmmakers, and I think, why not me? If they could do it, why couldn't I? Why couldn't I put together, take a class, put it? And so I want to inspire other people that it doesn't matter what you've been through or what experience you do or don't have. Like, go for it. Why not you? Everyone starts somewhere. You can too. Go for it. Like, just keep showing up. Just keep going for it. And you'll see how it unfolds. We don't know. It's kind of the fun adventure of not knowing the ending yet.
That's awesome. So that kind of goes into my next question, which you kind of answered, but so two-pronged. What would you say to someone who wants to help fight trafficking but doesn't feel adequate? And then what would you say to someone who maybe is in trafficking or was in a similar situation as you were and feels no hope? These are big questions.
Yeah. So my first would be, everyone can always do something to fight human trafficking. So if you're compelled to get involved in trafficking, don't let the lie of inadequacy stop you. Like, push it aside, push fear aside, push inadequacy aside, and take that first step. I recommend our Find Your Lane e-course, of course. I'll do small shameless plug, but it really is a great course. It's short. It's like, they're like 5 to 7 minutes per video. We kept it short, concise. We have a really funny quiz that you take, and then it tells you what type of lane that you could go into that would fit with your personality. And so we tried to make it, we use humor to make hard topics palatable. So it's not like trafficking. Ooh, I don't want to feel yucky all the time. Like, don't worry. We make it fun. We make it funny. We engage your personality. And then we point you to 10 different ways that you can fight trafficking. And we give you resources for groups that are specifically in that lane. So we're not pushing you back to us by any means. It's like, you want to work in outreach, go learn from Harmony Grillo at Treasure. She has a great outreach training that you and your church or your organization can learn how to do it in a trauma-informed way so that you have impact over intent, as Nikki Bell says, right? So like, go find your lane. Push it aside, go find your lane. And then for anyone that's in the situation that is feeling like they've parked right in that cycle of hopelessness and they've gotten out, and we go back and forth as we talked about earlier, I would say the same thing, right? Like, look fear in the face, look inadequacy in the face, push it aside, and just take that first next step. And you've lived through worse. You've lived through way worse. You can do this. Like, it's going to be hard. It's going to be scary. It's going to be different, but it's nothing scarier than what you've already lived through. And so what's the worst that can happen? You start over. Oh, well, you did that too. Like, oh, well, if it all falls apart and I start over, oh, well, I've done that before too. Like, nothing is worse than what you've already lived through. So don't camp there. Like, keep moving forward. Don't let that be the end. Don't let fear win. Like, you're a winner. You've conquered this. You've gotten out. You've already lived through really, really hard things, hardest things that most people will never be able to live through. And so, like, this is nothing compared. Whatever season it is you're going through, whatever hopelessness you're feeling, I have felt it. I've grieved. I've lost contracts. I've lost relationships. I've had really hard things happen to me. I've had my story stolen. I've been betrayed by good friends. I'm in therapy now for 14 years in this field. Like, it's been, believe me, there is a lot of hardship when you're out trying to do something, betrayed by board member. I mean, so many things. And it's hard. It's really hard. I'm not saying it's easy, and it's not like, oh, it's easy for you. Your organization just A, B, C, and D. It's like, no, I've almost lost my company. I've had to pull my company off from the borderline of bankruptcy almost. Like, I've had a really hard 14 years. but there's nothing harder than being trapped in a hotel room and beaten almost senseless. This is even like, you can do this. If you can get through that, you can get through this hard season. And I just kept telling myself, when I'm in these hard seasons, which I've had, and I'm in a really hard season right now, I have a Post-it that says, this will not be the same. Things will look different this time next year. And I just keep telling myself that. And I take one day at a time. You know what? By summer of next year, my life is going to look really different than the season I'm in right now. And I keep pushing forward every day, just focus on what I have to do today. And I just remind myself, this time next year is going to look really different. And so if you're in a season of hopelessness, do that too. Like, there's going to be times, but you can do this. You have lived through worse. You've lived through harder things. You can do this. You can get through the hopelessness.
So good.
So good. And
preaching to myself right now.
Well, I'm thinking of, like, a couple things. Hard season, yes, different but hard for sure. I'm gonna go get a Post-it, like, right after we're done. Absolutely.
I think it's hard. When my book first came out, my mom was diagnosed. My mom went into ICU. I was in New York on press tour, and my mom went into ICU for we didn't know. And she ended up in ICU for 29 days, 5 exploratory surgeries. We didn't think she was going to make it. And I was running back from, it's like, suddenly my memoir comes out. It's the thing I've been working for years. And so you feel this terror of, like, what do I do? So I'd land at the airport. I'd drive to the hospital at 1:00 in the morning. I'd try to advocate for my mom's physical well-being. I'd jump back on a plane at 6 back to, it was like really hard and hard on my kids. It was really hard. It was a hard season and really scary. And we got through it, and it was not easy, and we got through it. And there are some things that are relational that have taken hits because of those seasons, and because I kept pushing forward to go. So I'm not saying that I do it the right way every time either, by any means.
Well, it's kind of like the difference between a good hard and a bad hard, if that makes sense. Like, you're fighting for something, and you've also trailblazed for other survivors. And I'm not saying that that's, their experience is still going to be, so like you said, you have to walk through that. But I'm just so thankful that you've been able to create these resources that are in place, because it does give those kind of guidelines, those guideposts along the way, as somebody's looking for, hey, is this right? Is this normal? I can understand how that would be just really encouraging. It's almost like your lifeline, or just a light in the darkness that's shining through that. And so that's so great that that's already in place. And I'm just thankful that your life's work has been to do that. And I'm excited. I'm just so thrilled to hear that there's just so much more to come, because you have so many good things to say. And it's just so encouraging, for both people that are not survivors, but I'm sure for survivors as well, to hear that too. So
yeah, I think sometimes we don't talk about the setbacks and the hard seasons enough. We want to talk about the thriver side of things. And the reality is when we keep doing that, it's actually like partnering sometimes with others to make them feel condemned. Like, wow, why did Rebecca's life seem to just ABC and now she's thriving? And it's like, oh, no, let me tell you, this is not a thriving season. I'm having a lot of loss and grief in this season. I've had a lot, and openly being willing and vulnerable to share some of the times that have been really hard, right? Like, almost losing my organization was really hard. Going through all sorts of things because of that, financially, legally, relationship loss, having my story stolen from people I thought were my friends, having to spend money on legal that I don't have, like all sorts of nonsense, all sorts of relational fallout. Life isn't easy. Like, it can be messy, it can be hard. And there are seasons when you're thriving, and there are seasons when life is going to be hard too. And so I just want to be transparent enough with people to know, if a survivor is listening and they think, well, why isn't my life thriving like hers? It's like, no, believe me, there are times when it seems like I'm thriving and I feel like I am. And there are seasons that have been really, really hard, but we keep going. We remember we've lived through worse. We remember it's going to look different next year, and you keep pushing forward every day, one day at a time, and it's going to be okay.
So good. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That's really all. That's all we got on this end. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time. And again, the work that you're doing, and the work that you're continuing to do. It's just such an inspiration to everybody in the movement. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but just it's so encouraging, and just to give people that permission that the season that you're in is what it is, and just keep fighting through that, and know that it will, like, life, this too shall pass. Like, life shifts, and the things that you learn in a really hard season, maybe that's what takes you into a really good season, or you can really enjoy that good season. Like, that's so good. So
So true.
I just want to say thank you from, yeah.
Yeah. Rebecca, we wish you all the best.
Oh,
We're
thank
so
you.
excited for all of the tools that you put out there, and
Yeah.
to use those, to buy them, to recommend them, to
Mhm.
put those on our website. And we're just really grateful.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thanks. It is so fun to try to churn out content to help people better understand the issue. And I'm excited about all the things that we have brewing and working on and writing and filming now that we get to hopefully get out in January for National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And so, yeah, join us online, join our newsletter, follow us on socials. We'll be letting everyone know anytime we put out, new content, new resources.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna stop.